All right. Well, thank you all. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I hope everyone's been able to enjoy these last few sunny days, which hopefully will not be our last, but it certainly has been delightful to get outside. As always, thank you all for being a part of this group. I think we're doing exciting things, and I hope today will be good examples of things we're doing and things we might be able to do as we move forward. So I'm going to start us off as we work through our action-packed agenda, which includes the welcome and introductions. So if there are folks, I think we all know one another, so I think we may be good as far as introductions go, as long as everyone is comfortable with that. And welcome, of course. It hasn't been that long since we met, but I was excited going back through all my notes, seeing all of the fun things that we've continued to do in the meantime. As we work through the agenda, we've got some administrative things that we want to take care of. The first being the approval of the 2020 minutes, if people have had a chance to look at those. And if there is someone who would like to make a motion to approve, I'd be happy to receive it.
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Erin, from the School of Government, where they know how to make motions.
Seconded.
Is there a second or there? Perfect. Is there any discussion? Do people have corrections? Perfect. Well, the window remains open for corrections, but unless we have additional discussion, we will see if anyone objects to approving the minutes. All right, and hearing none, we'll move forward with minutes from December. So next up is an update from me, and just really quickly following that, we have a discussion period to talk about our draft climate action plan, which I'm really excited about and really I'm excited to get everyone's input on. We have a presentation from Elizabeth Havis, and Amy Cook, I think, will be joining us also, who was Elizabeth's collaborator on the work at CDS, to hear about that, how that interaction went, the things they accomplished, and then thinking ahead to how do we take these great activities and turn them into something that can be a part of the structure of what we do. I looked through my notes for this meeting and I had the word operationalized too many times, and I felt like I didn't want to really be saying that because it sounded a little formal, but we really want to. We want these awesome projects to not be one-offs, but rather be things that we can repeat again and again. Then finally, after that, we'll have Jeff Middlestat talking to us about the building project going on at Keenan Flagler and some specifics about that project and carbon neutrality. But then also, again, looking towards the future of trying to find ways to make these experiences positive for our overall approaches and ways that we can learn lessons as we go and try and figure out ways to do all the things we want to do around sustainability in the best possible way. And then finally, after that, we've got a period for open discussion just in case we have any loose ends after that. But I'll go ahead and kick off because I was putting this list together and it's a lot, which is awesome. I think we've been doing great stuff. So I'll start with external communications. I've already talked a little about the climate action plan. We're excited to have that in the queue, to have a draft of that our goal, I think, as we mentioned at the last meeting, is to have the draft released by Earth Day, but we'll talk more about that in the climate action plan section. I want to take a second here also to talk about Adam Long, who for a long time was working in energy services as a member of the sustainability team. And Adam, sadly but happily, found an awesome job and is no longer at the university. But I need to acknowledge that a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today that are ongoing projects and products, Adam contributed to mightily, and certainly the climate action plan is among those. So I just wanted to thank him, and he's got a really neat new job, so I'm excited for him. And I also thank him for not leaving the cupboard bare. There are wonderful things that he had ongoing right before he left. So accompanying that climate action plan, we have ideas around a similar water plan and a similar waste plan that will have the same kind of structure and will be the same kind of approach of looking forward. How are we going to, in the near term and the longer term, try and meet our targets in this area? The document that you all contributed to, our sort of statement of mission, visions, and goals is very much still in the hopper, but I think has just slid a little bit back in the list to try and push and get this climate action plan, the draft, out there, because that feels exciting and important. It's been more than 10 years since we've had a new climate action plan, and that feels like something that we could all really be happy to have out there. We also have had lots of ongoing conversations about our website and the social media. I'm extremely grateful to Stephanie Barrier, who's the Interim Director of Marketing and Communications in Finance and Operations, who's been really generous with her time and her expertise, and providing me advice about how best we can move forward with rethinking the website as we broaden our focus to sustainable Carolina, retain 3 zeros as our aspirational goal, but then also flesh out things like the draft climate action plan, which we'll talk about, which is going to primarily be a web presence so that it can remain evergreen and so that it can change as updates occur. So it's not a fixed document. So all of that is ongoing. We have a really, I think, a tenable but exciting plan to have that finished, so that as we release these new this new information we're talking about today, it's going to go into Sustainable Carolina website rather than into a relic website or a temporary website. So that's our goal. We're working that way. The final piece is Earth Day, and it's obviously a very strange year, another one for Earth Day, but we don't need to talk about it in detail today. But I would love if people have ideas around ways that in the pandemic world we can have a great fun day on Earth Day. That would be excellent. I have a few ideas, but most of them involve like safe transfer of merch, of t-shirts celebrating Earth Day, but any ideas would be welcome. And so I think that's the final piece under external communications. Another thing that I mentioned before that's been a big focus since the last meeting has been renewable energy. We're looking hard for large-scale opportunities for the university to build our renewable energy portfolio. So there is something called House Bill 589 that I think many of you are familiar with. That was a bill that looked broadly at renewable energy. And within that, it had something called the Green Source Advantage, which was set up to let big energy users, and among them military bases and the UNC system, and other big universities, have access to renewable energy. So far, it didn't work for the military because they have to be able to wall off and provide their own energy in times of emergency. So far, it worked for Duke University, but it has not yet worked for the UNC system schools. So I've mentioned this in the past. We've had great guidance from friends of the university working in lots of related sectors. I recently, in the interim since we last met, have had meetings with the North Carolina Solar Energy Association and CSEA, and with Duke Energy, just trying to look for any alternatives to see if we can make something work within the Green Source Advantage, or see whether there are any other alternatives. But this has been really interesting and fun, and I'm optimistic by nature, so I'm hopeful that we're going to get there. But there are a lot of layers to it, so there's definitely work to be done. We've really had great collaboration with Chapel Hill in the interim since we met last. I mentioned my meeting with the mayor in November, but since then I've been working with John Richardson, who is the Community Resilience Officer, and we've had conversations from really, really specific to much more general about smart ways that we can collaborate around sustainability. And we are mutually optimistic and enthusiastic about things we can do in the near term and things we can do in the longer term. They are fairly close to releasing their climate action plan. I think it's perhaps in March. And because we're in Chapel Hill, we're a part of their climate action plan. And so we're looking for ways to make all of our connections more active to the extent we can. So there are lots of different programs that send Carolina students to work in Chapel Hill. So trying to have all of the things that are going on around sustainability, not necessarily coalesce, but at least everyone be aware of it is definitely one of our goals. Then finally, collaboration within the university. I've continued to have amazing conversations with students and student groups. Nate and MC are doing a great job with their group of student leaders and trying to find a way to understand the collective interests of sustainability and environmental groups on campus and find ways to convey information well both ways. I think it's fair to say that's a work in progress, as it is with all of this, but they're doing good work. And Nate and MC and I have met several times talking about what can we do to be smart about improving all of those all of those systems to make them more efficient in terms of information flow. So I think a lot of us get individual calls from individual students or individual groups, and I'm always happy to help. But again, back to trying to find a way to build structures so that lots of things can happen rather than just the things that trickle up through someone's enthusiasm. So that has been really positive. In the category of student groups with whom I talked a lot, the NC PER group on campus was one who I've had ongoing conversations with. There was a nice article in the DTH talking about their efforts to move away from single-use plastics and the conversations that we've been having around that on the way to trying to achieve that goal. We've also had continued ongoing conversations with the university leadership, and they are definitely interested in what we're doing and supportive of this group's work, which is great. I have been working with several arms of university development, looking for fundraising opportunities. And I do think that there will be really exciting news forthcoming. So I think that is an area that we have many, many supporters in the world, whether they be corporate or whether they be individuals or whether they be foundations, and many people are interested in sustainability. And I think people are excited about the things we're doing, which feels very encouraging to me. So today, as far as collaboration with the university, within the university, we're going to hear two great examples from Elizabeth and from Jeff. And I'd just like to continue to think as we have more meetings scheduled on the books now, as a meeting with Office of Waste Reduction and Recycling, talking about all their great work around waste and ways that this group can help try and find new things to do and help them do what they do well and benefit from the great work that they're doing. We also have a meeting scheduled with Study Abroad to think about all the things about studying abroad that are related to sustainability, starting first with the challenge of any kind of long distance travel is trying to address the carbon footprint of that travel. So with these partnerships are great. It's exciting that we have a nearly infinite supply of awesome stuff going on at the university, and I continue to meet with the folks I can. So if any of you have, and many of you have come to me and said, this is a neat opportunity, we should meet with these people. So please continue to, because clearly to make this work, for our group to do what I think we need to do, this is absolutely a team sport. We have to engage the experts in all of the specific areas who are doing many of the great things already around sustainability. So I will stop there and see if anyone has any questions about the update.
Mike, this is great. Thank you so much for the overview. I'm wondering if you have like a format for how you'd like to receive our feedback on the climate plan, or like, what is the role of this group in advancing that planning? Oh, am I frozen or is Mike frozen?
I think Mike's frozen.
That's a common question these days.
Yeah. At least I wasn't muted.
I think that you are muted takes top position. Yeah, but Mike continues to be frozen.
Now he's gone, so we can take it as a sign of progress. Oh, he's back. You're muted.
Perfect. Sorry, I thought it was you, and all the while it was me. So
we were having that conversation too here.
Yeah. So I wonder if you have, is where I.
Oh, I was just wondering if what your plan is, or how best you'd like to get feedback on the document from this group. What's the role of this group in advancing these specific plans?
So as they come forward, as the draft climate action plan is today, we're going to talk about it. We have, I think, 30 minutes, something like that, upcoming right after this. So unless there are other questions, we can sort of segue into that. But my thought was, it is an unconventional time optimally, we would like to all meet in the Pleasance Family Room or somewhere delightful on campus and talk about the plan and talk about what a draft should look like. So my plan has been to run it by you all, to give you time to think about it and to react to it, provide any kind of input that you want. Also, Nate and MC are running it through their committee so that there'll be a student perspective, a subsampling of student perspective in student government. And then our thought was, assuming that we get to a place where it doesn't feel as though there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of people thinking it's a good draft, go ahead and launch it as a draft on the website and provide guidance to everyone as to how to interact with this document and how to provide guidance to our group as to things that people might want to change. All right, any other questions?
Do you have a big communications rollout for Earth Day planned?
So I do, but some of it's contingent upon certain things happening. I have a pretty high level of confidence that we're going to have 3 pretty exciting things. So I was going to go with fewer rather than more, but I would love to talk to the group, or we can do this offline if we want, and just plan a way to make sure that everything we know of gets amplified. I think I want it to be exciting, even though we can't be together, which is a shame, but I do think there are going to be substantive, amazing things from this group, at least 2 and maybe 3. But I also think there's so many great ongoing stories to tell. So I have a plan, but it's not comprehensive by any stretch. And it is another case of planning as we go. All right. So if there are not any other questions, we can talk about the climate action plan. So as in my answer, as when I was talking with Elizabeth, our idea is that in this pandemic time where we're not gonna be able to get together and have formal sessions to discuss the details of the plan, probably the most efficient way is for us as representing the university's interest in sustainability from faculty, students, and staff, Nate and MC focusing more directly on groups of students, get comfortable with the draft, and then have it be a web presence that will, being on the web is nice in that it'll enable us to update it as we go and won't have to re-release different versions as small changes take place. So what you were sent is a draft that Adam Long largely created, and to him I'm eternally thankful. It is, as you know from the emails, that one of the models that we liked was the University of Maryland and the way that they presented their climate action plan. And one of the things we really liked was the accordion sections, and they're in gray, where you'll have an accordion table to drop down lots of detail in areas where the primary heading can be enough information for a lot of people, but the information underneath may be of interest to a subset. So it allows the whole thing to be more compact, but it has the large amount of detail there. It's a format that I thought was good. It introduces the concepts around the plan. It talks about the 2009 plan and goes back through and looks at what was going on in terms of what the goals were, whether they were met, what the results were in terms of those goals that were set. Then there's a section on progress that really lays out how things have gone with emissions, what the breakdown is, and looks at how these emissions were achieved, models some scenarios, looking at either a business as usual or progress to date, and then our target to date, and see the growing gap from business as usual, which is a great way to visualize it. And then lays out a set of goals right now that are One of them is directly related to EO80, Governor Cooper's executive order, and achieving the goals in EO80. And then the second of which is to get to net zero by 2040, which is 10 years sooner than the last plan. And it then lays out a path forward and a set of projects. This document, because of the nature of our emissions, the projects, a lot of them are related to the operation of the university, and not so many of them are related to individual actions. But very quickly, you can imagine that shifts as you make headway in operations, then individual actions become a bigger priority. So it's not to say that either have been identified as more important than the other. It's just scaled as far as current contributions. There's a section on how to prioritize projects, which I think is practical and would benefit from everyone's input to think about how do we pick which projects to pursue, because certainly we'll have to make choices. We're not going to be able to do everything. And then lays out some details about how we might get there, what our major targets are, and thinking about possible ways to reach them. It does have a funding section, just thinking it mentions a green revolving fund, which is a really nice idea that other universities have used, where you start with a block of money and you're able to use that money to invest in efficiencies. And there's an agreement that the money saved through those efficiencies, some portion of it goes back to the revolving fund. So that's a possibility. Grants for specific activities, I think, will certainly be the case. And hopefully these sorts of things, we're going to have both internal support and it's looking like there is enthusiasm externally as well. So that, I think, is a very quick overview, and I'd be happy to talk with people about things that you think we should work through today.
So I have a question about the green revolving fund. And has there been any thought about or discussion about whether that can be done in combination with a student-run managed fund to invest in certain ESG type investments or impact investments on certain asset categories to grow that money even further? And then also have the educational component of students learning how to manage and invest in the ESG and impact investing space?
Not yet, but we should talk about it today, because I mean, that's a great idea. I do think probably there would be a phasing where we would get the revolving fund going and just get the logistics going. But I think that's a fantastic idea, not to limit your return to just being efficiencies, but also having it be potentially returned through other mechanisms like targeted investment, which sounds great to me.
I guess my other,
we,
go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, we just might check the experience of some of the state revolving funds around that, though, because that can create some conflicts of interest in how money is put out. And so while I agree in principle, I think it's going to be very complicated in execution.
Yeah. And perhaps those end up as discrete but complementary pieces. Yeah.
Correct.
No, that's a great point.
Right. Like we have some fund models in the business school that maybe we can, like you said, have discrete but somehow connected.
Yeah.
Complementary.
Also, there's a couple, I mean, there's like this big $1 billion challenge that kicked off so many of these funds at universities. And there's a couple great examples. I know Boston University does it really well. So we at the EFC have looked at those. So we're happy to, when we get to that point, and advise a little on which maybe is the best model to look at as an example.
That would be fantastic, because I did look at Boston University, I looked at Harvard, I looked at Arizona State, kind of the ones that are the most prominent, but that would be fantastic. Thank you, Erin.
Sure.
And have there been thoughts given to sources of capitalization? I mean, is this something that the state or federal government, I assume there's going to be a raft of new climate programs and support coming out from the federal government that you might be able to take advantage of to capitalize something like that?
Yeah, I think at this point, I don't have strategy or even tactics in that realm, more just looking everywhere for money. But I do think we've got a reasonable shot at having the development route be a source of some seed money. And hopefully there could be some degree of internal match, who knows? I feel like it's a thing where you'll get momentum as somebody says, okay, I'm in. But I'm open-minded. Yes, I'm optimistic that there are potentially multiple sources, and I will definitely look to you, Aaron, to find out where to look up the road in DC.
Sorry, the only other thing I'll add is that most of the state revolving funds actually lose money. And so there's a subsidization element that's required. And so that's probably something we'd have to think about. I mean, rightfully so. I mean, I think it's fair for the states and governments to invest in these things to make them work, but that's something we should just be conscious of.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
Mike, one thing that stood out is just based on the conversations that we've been having internally as our team and as a school of government on kind of university life 2.0 once we actually ever go back, is just sort of, raising the awareness of the environmental impact reduction that happens from us all being remote and whatever when we go back. I think as a university initiative, I know that they're contemplating what that's going to mean like for staff and faculty and all the different variations. So, as they think about those policies, there's, amazing benefits for the climate impact. And so it's something, I don't know how it would exactly integrate into this plan, but it's something I think could potentially have, some significant implications for that goal. If there's that, especially like when I look at the parking or the commuting piece and how that's been increasing and things like that. Personally, for my staff, I'm hoping to allow much more flexibility in that and not requiring people to go through the same effort to get to the campus.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point in figuring out where that slots in terms of, it may not be through the climate action plan, it may be through the return to campus process, which honestly, I don't know how that will be laid out right now, but that's a great point and I will do my best. And also reminds me that I left transportation and parking off the list of people who I'm meeting with soon. So they seem really enthusiastic and have done some really interesting things. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a great thing to remind them of. I'm sure they think all about it though, because it's going to dramatically change the way they do business quickly.
So Mike, I'm going to build on what Aaron said. So one aspect of getting to an aggressive 2050 goal is some behavioral changes and some professional changes, not just whether we're coming to the office, but also how much we're traveling. And that seems, there are certainly, incentives at the university that cause us to make certain choices, and I don't know whether we as a committee want to think about that, but it seems like that's an important piece to achieving the goal. And then the other, I guess I don't know the extent to which this committee is willing or able to look beyond what is within the direct control of UNC, because achieving the 2050 goal also requires new technologies, it requires new investments, it requires new policies, which, there are other levels of the university that are engaged in different decision-making around that, but it certainly affects the goals that we're going to try to achieve. And, I think we can, on the policy side, it's certainly possible for us to engage in policy debates without advocating on behalf of UNC for a particular outcome or not. And, to the extent that we want to have a group that is focused on that, I think it's kind of an open question in my mind.
No, I think that's a great point, and a huge aspect of the opportunity around the climate action plan, but outside the exact scope of it, as you said. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, and I don't think we would be doing what we all want to do if we didn't avail ourselves of those related opportunities to affect the things that we know really will determine whether or not we reach these goals.
I agree. It's great hearing everyone's perspective, and I really enjoyed reading the report, and amazing job of putting it together. I thought it was really interesting the way that 25% of the emissions are from air travel. I think even sharing that information is great, and I'm having trouble finding where it is in the document now, but I also really appreciated the communication element as a key strategy. And so I think that connects with what several people are saying, but sharing this information on campus, making it clear what the campus is doing. And I think it connects with Nathaniel and MC's work as well, that there's so many overlapping efforts. And so the extent to which this can help to share information and coordinate activities, bring things together is aspirational, right? But also I think really important, and including having formal communication elements. A lot of the students that I've been working with are interested in having a sustainability, like they want an English 105 that's required for first year students. That's all about sustainability on campus and, formal campus activities and individual activities. So I think that communication component is key as well.
Absolutely. I did have a meeting with Nate and MC, I think it was last week. And one of the things we talked about was communication, not only of the climate action plan, but thinking about how do we communicate to the people who will never go see the climate action plan. And we talked a lot about the Carolina Together dashboard and things like that as being really appealing to a broader audience, and went through the iterations of, but how do we convey greenhouse gas reduction? Because it's not like positives per day or something like that. So I do think it comes back to the idea of data around sustainability and the degree to which things like building specific energy usage or water usage or whatever it may be could be really valuable indicators of progress, but more importantly, education pieces about here's how it's happening. Yeah, the air travel thing to me is really interesting, and Jonas alluded to it. I mean, I don't think it's probably our place to say you shouldn't be traveling internationally so much, but I do think having people be aware of what the implications are is really important.
I feel like if there would be a way to gather data, I was struck, of course, all the data stops at 2020, but to look at the differences just from the pandemic time, and to be, as this planning for reentry emerges, just sharing that information and showing the differences would be really, I think, really impactful.
I think that the impact might be even stronger if we saw an investment in virtual meetings technology, because we already learned over past year that we can meet online, but it's crude. But we see emerging technologies that improve that experience. And if this particular development follows, we may see reduction in travel in the future for business travel, because better tools that will mimic more in-person experience will actually emerge. And then we can use it really well, kind of side to side with information about how much impact physical travel makes.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that you know about new technology, because I don't, and that feels exciting, because I think when we get to the end, if we're using what we're using now, everyone will just say, "Ooh, that was hard. Let's get back to seeing each other every day." But your point is excellent, that if there were we've shown we can do it, and if we could do it well, that would be awesome.
I have to admit that partially I know about those technologies because of my son, who is big tech.
Aha.
And
Good.
I got a wonderful Christmas present, which is virtual reality.
Nice.
But realistically speaking, I'm not talking about VR, but I'm talking about significantly better tools.
That's good, because when I put on those goggles, I get a little vertigo.
Well, but this raises an interesting question that we're struggling with right now. So we host probably the world's largest international conference on water and health. And last year we did it virtually. We had 3,500 people from over 140 countries participating, which is about 3 times what we see from our in-person conference. But it's really built a lot of support for our in-person conference. But it also means that our future conferences probably have to be hybrid, because we still now have a constituency to be able to do it. And there is an incentive to doing that in reducing air travel to North Carolina and things like that for the conference. But I wonder if we're measuring those types of outputs for events like that. But if we could use that to drive the adoption of new technology on campus that would enable us to have enhanced hybrid events, I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and to answer your question quickly about the data, those data on travel to events at Carolina are not in the current data set, but those sorts of things, I mean, that's a really amazing student project, or probably too hard to be a student project right up front, but that's an amazing issue that we should look at for sure. Yeah, thank you. All right, so other specific thoughts. I think generally I'd like to make sure that people feel comfortable with this idea of a draft climate plan being released on the website, identified as a draft, and making it clear that this is where we're starting and allowing for everyone's input as we go forward, and make sure that I'm not the only one who thinks that that's a practical solution in this difficult time.
I guess it might be worth thinking about a structure for receiving feedback, having a structure in place. Is there a timeline for public comment, a form to fill out? A way, will those be public? Will that feedback be publicly available, et cetera?
Right. No, those are all great questions. And I don't know yet, but I do think we definitely need to have something other than a little comment box for sure. So something between a questionnaire of how much do you like it and just an empty box, something that's going to allow people to provide feedback. Yeah, I'm not sure about the public part, but that's an excellent point also, is to think that through. But I was thinking a window, but not short. It could be a few months. All right, any other thoughts on that? Definitely, as far as the logistics of making commenting work, we're not there yet, but I think it's something we definitely know is a high priority for planning. All right, well, obviously this isn't the end by any stretch in terms of interactions around this. We've got till 22nd of April, and I think a lot of things can be adjusted as we go. I will make it a priority to come up with a plan, a rough plan for what the interface would look like to provide comments, and share that with you all soon. All right, anyone else on the draft climate action plan?
I wanted to, someone earlier today said that, not everyone will read the action plan. So I was thinking in the meantime how to remedy this particular reality. And maybe one of the ways to consider it is to build personas from different perspectives that kind of turn the action plan into what persona A or B or C can do on every day. If you are a student, you can do this and this and this, and kind of bring the more of the awareness with links to actual more information too, but kind of simple things what you can do. When you are done with your lunch, look for the compost box.
Mm-hmm.
You can do this. Everyone can do that, right? Those kind of things with different profiles.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, and was part of why I think I called attention to the fact in the plan that it's largely institutional actions now, but it can't, for it to be our document, you're absolutely right. It needs to have a better what can you do? And I think that's an excellent point, and one that we have good ideas around that. It just needs to be better integrated into the whole. Thank you. That's a great point.
Hey, Mike, I have one more thought just in terms of the framing. The document mentions Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80 and the goals there. So Governor Cooper's, he will be governor for 4 more years, and then we'll have another governor, and those goals may change. It seems to me like we could also link the framing to what other, great universities are doing, right? Because this is going to be a part of us having to compete for students. This is a part of the way that we engage in society. And I think that the goals should be, clearly outlast any change in, the governor's goals, whether Cooper changes his goals or a future governor changes goal.
That's a great point. Yeah, thank you. And I think absolutely right. Yeah, and the goals are pretty straightforward, and I think there's certainly an opportunity to think beyond them, and this is a great example of one that makes all the sense in the world. And the exciting thing about having it be a web document is that we will have the ability to change as things change, but that's not at all to say that we should just rest on having EO80 be our benchmark. Yeah, thank you, Jonas. That's a great idea. All right, well, thank you all. I will take from our conversation, I've got a handful of actions that we'll take. The idea of sooner rather than later trying to build out the framework for interaction with the document and getting everyone's input from your experience with similar things, either in designing them or as a participant. So that'll be great. And if people have additional thoughts, obviously, please reach out. All right, so next up, we have Elizabeth, and I think maybe Amy Cook also, talking to us about their work at CDS, at Carolina Dining Services, and thinking about the really neat individual project. Great students participated in it and did amazing work, but then also thinking about how is this a good example of the kinds of things that we could be doing a lot more, and how do we what's a smart way to make that happen in terms of structures. So I will turn it over to Elizabeth.
Great. Thanks, everybody. I did ask Amy Cook to come. She's on the faculty in E3P and has been a collaborator in this. And we actually asked a student to present initially, and she had a class and was really disappointed she wasn't going to get to talk to you all. But the students that we have worked with on this initiative created this amazing presentation. So I just modified it a little bit to share with you. I think it's a useful example. I'm going to walk through a little bit of the history of how the dining services have made this commitment to sustainable purchasing and procurement. And I'll talk a little bit through the history of that, and then this project that students led last year to kind of revisit the commitment and to see if it's doing the things that CDS and the university community want it to do. And I can take zero credit for anything that you see here. It's all was done by these brilliant students last year who were a part of the project. We got funded by the Office of Undergraduate Research. They have the Strike Team program for interdisciplinary research projects. So we spent the year looking at the CDS commitment to the Real Food Challenge. And please interrupt me as I go along if you have any questions. Okay, so what's the Real Food Challenge? It's a third-party certification organization. So I think it's useful to walk through this. Like, what are the pros and cons of using existing standards to try to achieve goals that we set on campus? It developed a sustainability metric and auditing processes for institutional dining systems. So it has these categories that define by which it defines real food. And it asks, you get credit for purchasing real food if you meet any one of these 4 criteria, and you get extra credit or just extra kudos if any purchase meets 2 of the categories. So the Real Food Guide is focused on local and community-based products, fair products, ecologically sound products, and humane products. So of course, there are definitions and metrics of each of these things. And so what happened, how did UNC decide to come to the Real Food Challenge and commit to the Real Food Challenge guideline? It was, of course, unsurprisingly, a student-led initiative in around 2007 and 2008, a student organization called Fair Local Organic, which is right now not too active on campus. They made a really big push to work with CDS and try to develop more sustainable procurement practices. They were particularly interested in trying to emphasize the local local and supporting community, the North Carolina agricultural sector. So that was a real push. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Like, what were the goals? The students had a really specific set of goals, and those might not be the definition of sustainable food system today. So the students found out about the Real Food Challenge. They started to communicate with CDS and with campus leadership. And around during this time between 2007 and 2008, CDS started to kind of go through their procurement and to test it against Real Food Challenge standards. And they found out that they had a little bit of low-hanging fruit, right? Already 13% of purchases were meeting that guideline, and they kind of felt that it was reasonable that they would be able to achieve the Real Food Standard commitment, which was a commitment to have 20% of total procurement meet the standard. So it wasn't until 2016 that Chancellor Foltz signed on to the RFC pledge. This was the commitment to purchase 20% real food. By that time, CDS had already revamped its procurement to be able to achieve that target. Right, so it was really important to the university that they could sign something that they knew right away they would be able to meet. We have this point here in 2014 that the relationship during this time between CDS, the students, campus leadership, and the Real Food Challenge organization was really kind of collaborative. It was a sort of a joint effort to build the standard and to ensure that CDS was going to be successful. CDS was really important to RFC. We're getting into the acronym soup. But it was really important to RFC because it's their biggest university that had signed on to the pledge. So it was, kind of a high profile situation. So 2016, Chancellor Foltz signed the pledge. And then in the last couple of years, beginning around 2017, once the pledge was signed, in addition to, the commitment for procurement, students also audit every semester 1 month of CDS purchases, and they test it against the RFC standard. So there's a lot of, there's an auditing component. Students are really involved. The auditing experience is fantastic. Students learn so much about the difficulties of working in an institution, the kinds of commitments that it takes. They learn a lot about big corporations. Their places they are in are not flexible. So there are a lot of positive things. But in around 2017, 2018, both interns, CDS, student organizations started to get more frustrated with the Real Food Challenge standards and the organization. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And that led us to kind of form this strike team to say, all right, is RFC the tool that we want to use? So this is just a graph of the percentage of procurement of purchases that comply with the RFC guidelines, and how that's worked over time. And as a note, one of the big sources of frustration is that in this time frame right around here, RFC changed their standards and they changed their standards and they required UNC to follow their new standards. And there's been a lot of conflict there with UNC saying, well, what the commitment we signed was to the previous standards. And we weren't consulted at all about the changes. This doesn't necessarily match our institutional goals. So there's been this kind of growing tensions and disparities over time, a lack of communication from RFC, the standard changing, new requirements, different approaches to auditing that just kind of come down the pipeline, and CDS is constantly having to respond to these changes and not really getting a chance to kind of offer feedback or to talk about what the institution is facing. And over time, we've started to see this kind of mismatch and tension between CDS and RFC over really what the definition of sustainability should be, and whether RFC is the best option for achieving those goals. And at certain points, we started to see CDS begin to discuss considering alternatives. Are there better tools that are going to work for us? Would it be better if we defined our own standard? So as we're working through this climate, trying to create a climate action plan and define our own parameters, I think there's some relevant lessons here. So at this time, Amy and I said, hey, let's have some students do some research and let's investigate what's out there. Let's pause. Let's not do anything dramatic. There are a lot of really positive things about the RFC standard and relationship. And so the students interviewed all of these different stakeholders. Partially, we were asking the question was if, you know, the incentives that led students to press for RFC, are those the same things that people on campus and in the community that works with campus, are those the same concerns people have? There's a lot more interest now in labor conditions in agriculture, for instance, and other kinds of certification schemes. So the students interviewed a bunch of different stakeholders in the university and outside. They looked at other institutions that are using third-party standards or developing their own standards. They did interviews with them as well. And they also surveyed students on campus, which I think is really useful as well. So what did they find out? They looked at all of the possible third-party standards they could find. These on the top row here. And they, in the assessment, found that RFC is by far the most rigorous and most structured standard that's available. So that was really useful, just useful information to be able to go to CDS and say, here's what we could find for options. The other standards had less accountability, less stringent requirements, or maybe they focus on just a very specific part of dining, but not all of the procurement. They also talked to several university systems that have tried to develop their own standards. And generally they found that that was exciting because it got to speak to the specific desires of the university. And that was, I think, what was starting to emerge at UNC as well. And that there were other, possibilities for the UNC system perhaps to develop a standard together, to work across the ag university versus not. But overall, the organizations that were developing their own standards did not recommend it. They basically said this is extremely time consuming. We're having a really hard time figuring out how we're going to be accountable to the standards that we come up with. We're concerned that we'll run out of resources to be able to do our own auditing. We're concerned about legitimacy. Are others going to see this as legitimate in the end? And who's going to do the work? Essentially, who is going to do the work at the end of the day? Will this be economically sustainable? Oh, I see Amy's here. Hi, Amy. So that also was just really important feedback. Just one quick quote. Overall, I think it's best not to develop an internal standard like we did. We heard a lot of reflections on that. And then finally, the students surveyed, they got 238 responses of students about just what did they know about Carolina Dining Services work on sustainability. And 71% had no idea that there was any sort of commitment in dining services to sustainability. Despite that, we didn't talk much about what has been done, but it's been pretty amazing how much positive change they've made in their commitment in CDS to doing that work. And we were particularly struck by this because 43% of the respondents were students in environmental studies and environmental sciences, the students that would care about this the most. So we were just really struck by that finding that there's a lot of interest in these issues, but then a huge disconnect with the knowledge on campus of all of the hard work and changes that are being done. That's also been really exciting about the auditing because students basically come in saying we want to change this, we want it to be better. And they get in and they're like, oh my gosh, they're already doing so much. And oh my gosh, the students will only eat Cocoa Puffs. How do we have a sustainable food system when the students only want to eat Cocoa Puffs? Yeah, and then there are just some broad conclusions from general stakeholders. These really just focus on if RFC is the strongest and best standard, then what are the ways that the university can continue to invest in the relationship with RFC and bring more people into those relationships and demonstrate the leadership that we've taken on campus. A recommendation to continue communicating with students, listening to their input about sustainability, but also trying to have a little bit more back and forth between what's being done and what's possible. And these are the recommendations from the strike team. First, they were like, let's hire someone to work specifically on the food system, which is amazing, right? CDS was like, yes, sign us up. We would love that. But really this question about increasing communications, the students had great ideas and they took so much initiative. They developed a short video that I've been using in my classes about the CDS program, just to raise awareness about what's going on. And they recommended staying with RFC for now. as a way to maintain accountability while CDS identifies alternatives, especially because, I think everyone sees with campus organizations that students come and go. And so having the stability of RFC to see through those transitions is really useful, including because of changes in CDS. Right now, CDS is having to renegotiate their procurement contracts. So everything could change if they move to a different food supplier, the whole relationship. Amy, would you like anything to add in?
You're covering it pretty well, actually. I do love that it's all here, because I have students who will come in like, we need to get into Happy Meat, or we need to get, away from CAFO pigs. I was like, do you have any idea what CDS is already doing? And then I immediately turn around and sign them up for the internship and make them do the work, which it's nice to have that available to me as an option. But we took this year off because the dining halls it's a mess. And we do have data from February that theoretically we might have access to next year. We don't know. This is one concern we have going forward. But it's really hard to do all of this in the black box that is Zoom, as opposed to being in the basement of Lenore and having easy access to the Aramark and to Scott Myers, who can help us with it.
Yeah, so I think that the success has really been CDS's commitment. Their leadership has been absolutely essential. Developing a really strong relationship between CDS and especially Amy, who has been just absolutely instrumental in keeping the auditing process going, has been really key. But I think there is this ongoing question of how is RFC a baseline, but then what are once we've achieved those goals, this is where I think the lessons are really interesting for the group. We've achieved this baseline 20%, but there are other things that CDS and students really want to do, really want to support local farmers, really want to connect to food security questions. So how do we keep the baseline of RFC and then still continue to improve on the defining goals and making real changes toward them? So yeah, I think that's it from us. Happy to answer any questions.
So maybe one quick one. Was there anything done to look at willingness to pay among the students?
Yes, actually, but I don't have, do you have the data at your fingertips there, Elizabeth?
Oh gosh, I could look at I would have to pull up the other file. One of the most important things actually is that CDS at UNC is one of the few universities that doesn't require meal plans for students. And that is an equity and justice commitment, right? So that students if they can't afford it, they don't have to. So but on the flip side, it really creates some financial constraints for CDS. But yeah, we don't, in terms of student willingness to pay in general, I think it's like all of the other data that the students love to say, yes, we'll pay. And then at the end of the day, they will choose the bowl of Cocoa Puffs. Sorry for the Cocoa Puff branding advertisement.
There's also, there is also a separate dining board that CDS has full of students as well that are focused on cost and quality and different issues, but not sustainability issues. And one of the students who worked on this project with us was also on that dining hall steering committee board. So it was nice because she gave us some insider information that we might not have known about dynamics, but also really helpful because she had an eye for what was going on in terms of equity and affordability on that side. It also makes it really hard to compare across schools, the fact that we don't require a dining hall, a meal plan in any way, and that we have several different varieties of meal plans. It's hard to even compare us with NC State and to Duke, let alone our sister, or those that we consider to be at our same level in other states, because it's apples and oranges. The plans that we're using aren't the same, we actually do. I don't know if you said this earlier, Elizabeth, when I was off with the students still, but the university underwrites some of this as well. So the students are already paying more for this as a part of student fees. And I'm assuming it's just straight student fees, but so there already is something, so we're already paying a little bit more for it.
Yeah, and the constraint with RFC, with the guidelines, is that RFC has one standard. It applies to Evergreen with its own farm and student labor force, and it applies to UNC. And so just the institutional constraints around questions of seasonality, student size, growing seasons, are so dramatically different. And RFC to date they have expressed a reluctance to differentiate among universities and differentiate their standards. And we think one of the exciting potentials is for RFC to develop a network of schools that are committed to this work in order to, potentially, what if all of the schools in our region could become a steady source of supply for a cooperative milk producer, for instance. So there are some possibilities there that are unrealized.
Did you all, after you got the survey results that showed such little knowledge of the program and everything, were you able to do anything to sort of integrate awareness into the curriculum and things in an effective way?
So Carolina Dining Services gets really frustrated about this in general, because they're like, we sort of tweet about it and students should know. So but there isn't, there just isn't personnel to systematically do that. So Amy and I make much more effort to integrate this formally into my own classes. But the students, one of their recommendations was, what if in orientation, new student orientation, there's one module on all of the sustainability activities on campus and connections to the student groups that are working on them. But there isn't anything formal at this point. And then, just a definite pause on everything over the last year. And Amy and I in particular were just really concerned about stressing our collaborators at CDS. We just have said to them, do you want, if it helps you to go forward with the audits at this time, let us know. If not, let's wait and restart next year.
The CDS has had now several communications and marketing interns who theoretically would be doing more of this, but it doesn't seem to make a lot of inroads. I mean, they've got the big poster on the wall as you're going downstairs from the top of Lenore that has some pictures of farms, but those aren't those were the farms at that week when they put that up that they were getting them from, and that's not how food distribution networks work. And so those aren't consistently the farms that they're using.
And some of our students have that as they're doing the audit, we're trying to have one intern that does it 2 semesters, and the second semester they do a special project that has like a sustainability food night or something along those lines. But there definitely could be something that's more systematic. And I think it's also been really interesting just to see what students are interested in. They're really interested in compost and waste, right? They're really, really, really interested in that. And the broader questions about across the supply chain, energy and emissions across the supply chain seem less exciting to them at this moment in time. That will change next year, probably to something else, but
yeah.
I might
That was
reach out to
great.
you all to see if there's a way that I can incorporate something, at least some of your findings, into one of my classes, if not both. I'd love to talk offline to think about how to take a business class in that realm.
that would be great.
I have
And
ideas, but I want to talk to the experts who have been.
It would be awesome.
I was here for
would be
2 months before we went virtual, so I haven't had a chance to go over the dining services even.
that would be great. And our students participate in FoodCon every year. They love it. And one of the students is leading a journal article based on the study and the experience. So that will hopefully be a good resource. Another thing we thought was super interesting is there's very little scholarly literature on university commitments to sustainable food. We've had a really hard time finding anything. So then we thought, okay, let's write this experience up. So hopefully that could be a resource as well.
And supply chain, there's a lot of interest, I think, in the environmental program and supply chains writ large. So we would love to talk about that.
We definitely have some food supply chain cases in my classes. So awesome.
Excellent.
Thanks. Thank you for all of this.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth and Amy. That was great. I do think that there's a common theme of there's so much more going on than we know that I want to make sure we hold on to. And as we think about how best to convey it, whether it be day to day or whether it be in some sort of an educational package that everyone needs to get. I mean, there are remarkable things going on and not a lot of people know about them. So I think we are fortunate to have great stories to tell, but figuring out how best to convey it individually and as a whole is a challenge for sure, but exciting. All right, if there are not any other questions, that was awesome. Thank you. And I will say that I think we have ongoing conversations with CDS, and we'll be circling back to you guys and make sure that we're doing things in the right way based on your experience. But it does feel like there's a lot of opportunity there. And if you look at our nitrogen export as a university, it's almost all food leaving the university. So there's a lot to do in a lot of different contexts. Thank you guys very much. All right. And next up, yeah, that's right, clap. Next up, Jeff is going to talk to us about a building project at Keenan Flagler and the ideas around carbon neutrality and trying to do the right thing as you're building a building.
All right. Bear with me for a second because I want to give some context, because I think a building is, and this might sound cheesy, but a building is a reflection of what you do in that building and why that building exists. And so some of the things that we're excited about through the Center for Sustainable Enterprise kind of feed into, without us having to push it, feed into some of the things that we're trying to do around the 3 zeros and even just the orientation of the new building, or the addition, I should say. You can have this later, but the idea here, I always put this up because when I say sustainability, I want people to know that whenever I say the term sustainability, it is always about the connection and the enhancement of social, environmental, and economic impact at the same time. So I try not to separate it out, whether it's in my classes, in the cases we study, et cetera. But through this conversation, when I say that, I just want you to know that that's what I'm thinking about when I say this. And we have a big focus, especially now in our center, of working across the campus. As you all know, being professionals in this area, sustainability can't be successful without crossing boundaries, crossing borders, getting out of our silos and connecting and helping each other reach our goals through the sustainability frameworks that we all work with. So MBA FoodCon, which was just talked about, is actually not just MBAs, but it's still called that because it's actually hosted by our MBA Net Impact student group in Keenan Flagler, along with a student group in the MBA program at Fuqua Business School at Duke and at NC State in Poole Business School. So that's cross campus. We have our sustainability awards coming up on April 22nd. I put that on there because if you want me to say something during that about the climate action plan, let me know. But we've involved our undergraduate sustainable business club in nominating companies who do business in North Carolina for our one sustainability award that we give to a business each year, which has been amazing because we had 40, I think, nominations from the student club. And then they actually got 18 of them to do interviews with them for further assessment for the awards, which is way more than we've been able to do in the past. Our Invest for the Future initiative is encompassing everything that I'm about to talk about. But we're connecting education and training through the idea of what is ESG integration and investment, and what is impact investing? What do those things mean? And what do they mean across the board? But then how do they connect to companies who have been using ESG metrics to try to understand themselves and make decisions for decades? By doing that, our main effort is not actually to focus on the center. And that's why we even have created this new kind of image for it. Is we're trying to connect all of the courses across business school and across campus that can connect to these in some way. So I'll have a company come to me and they want to know something very general about ESG aggregation. And ESG is environment, social, and governance for everybody out there. Most of you probably know that. But then some say, we have this one metric and we don't know what we're doing on it. Where do we go? You don't necessarily they might come to the business school because we interact with businesses, but I don't have expertise in that. So I want to be able to send them across campus to Aaron to tell them about some water metrics that they might need to understand better, right? And so that kind of thing. And then our leadership and network, we're going to have a leadership council which is practitioner-based council. And then again, just connecting research throughout the university and see if we can shepherd the companies to the places where the research is being done. And then co-curricular and extracurricular events. We have a bunch of competitions. We have a new one called the India Impact Challenge, which is in April. Again, with this, we're in the process of hiring 10 interns right now. And they are not all business students by any stretch. So we have global cinema majors, environmental studies. We have policy and economics, and then some business students in there, and multimedia and journalism. We're also going to do on kind of bringing in heavily the India Impact Challenge is about globally equitable economic development by addressing climate change. And it's open to all students from all departments across UNC and actually across the globe, undergraduate and graduate, which is exciting. And we just found out that we're going to do another one in the fall that's using blended finance and sustainable finance for investing in and addressing social equity, social justice, and economic mobility. Why do I bring those up? No, that's the India Impact Challenge. Anyway, bring those up because with the new building, even the orientation of it has been thought about in terms of, I'm actually gonna come back to that slide. How do we connect better with the rest of campus? So, which is really, so the CSE, yes, we're gonna have a spot in this building, but everything that we do, we need to communicate and collaborate across all of the departments and all of the schools with all of you. And so that was important to us as well. And so this is, I'm going to caveat everything with, we are designing. So we're in the design phase. So anything that's happening now doesn't mean that it's been a decision yet. But we are basing what we're doing on connecting to the rest of campus a little bit better. Because right now it's, the entry to our building is all the way up and around and a little bit off of campus. So, but we are orienting this around the 3 zeros, which is really exciting. And that did not have to come from CSE, which is even more exciting for me, at least. And within that, we're going to look at, net zero carbon, net zero waste, zero water, not going to, we have been for a while. We also want to make and create a healthy and welcoming environment for everyone who comes into the building, works in the building, stays in the building. Part of that is we're looking at Fitwell. I don't know much about Fitwell yet. So if anybody has worked with Fitwell certification for buildings, I would love to meet with you at some point, but we're looking at that as well. So that human health aspect and even your state of mind when you're in a building, right? More natural light, being able to see the forest that's there to the west of where the building will be, using healthy materials, indoor air toxics, those kinds of things. And then we will, like I said, at the bottom here, it's about enhancing our connection and building across campus, our relationships across campus. So here are a couple different diagrams. So the old business school, I was about to point to my screen up here. Down here in the right-hand corner is where the current business school is in the Call building. So if you cross over that drive over here, there's a parking deck. And then the building will be right next to the parking deck. The addition will be. We will use a lot of biophilic attributes to connect to the forest, provide vistas and views of the forest so that you feel like you're with nature when you're in the building. And we'll be using a lot of natural landscape. Also, especially on the zero water side, is the bioretention terraces, the wetland terraces. We want to put in constructed wetlands and regenerative stormwater conveyance. And I might get to that in a little bit. So back to the project goals. Water, we're working with OWASA for for bringing in reclaimed water into our systems. And that's actually a big percentage of it. We're also looking at captured rainwater. We're looking at air handling unit condensate, things like that we might be able to do on site. But we feel, or the team who's working on this feels pretty confident about the zero water aspect of this. As far as the zero waste, there will be behavioral components, and we're very well aware of that. I loved working on that part at Davidson College when I was there. It's not an easy aspect, as Elizabeth was alluding to too, is how do you get people, in the business classes, we use the impact management project for framing sustainability issues and how businesses can address them. And one of the risks that we look at is stakeholder participation risk. So if you have a compostable one-time use, packaging to get carry out or something like that, it only does what it's supposed to do if it's actually composted. If it ends up in the landfill, we could have additional methane issues and things like that. So we're trying to figure out how can we incorporate that into maybe at least my classes, if not some of the other classes. But behavior is a big thing. But behavior also, and I'll talk about this a lot on the energy side, is our behavior on campus, our behavior as staff, as faculty throughout our campus, because behavior change is difficult. I mean, if you've been trained in something for a long time and we have new technologies we're using, there needs to be training with that. And with when I was at Bank of America working on green building, it was very much, we brought in the companies that we decided to use to do the training, and they usually did it for free. And then we usually had to probably do it again. But that is kind of something that we're dealing with. Now, the team who's been working on this for a lot longer than I've been here, one of the things they said was there were no standards for us to use here. So they went with the LEED Zero standard. And so that's what we're using to try to calculate our zero in terms of carbon zero, net zero carbon, net zero waste, and zero water. Now, I'm going to concentrate on energy. This is a tough one to get to where we really want to be. So we've got, there's the code baseline. Through our improved envelope, we can reduce it quite a bit, the energy usage quite a bit. We want to use radiant flooring. Radiant flooring has been around for a long time. There were issues decades ago. The technology is really good now compared to what it used to be. But that kind of thing in terms of maintenance is going to take training again, right? So there's that aspect of it because we don't use that here. Then PV. I'm skipping some things, but there's more. We have variable air in the kitchens to reduce energy use and increase efficiency of the system. But we also have designed this to have PV on the roof, on the walkway, I believe, and then also where we can on the roof of the McCall building, the old building. And with that, we can get to about just over 60% of what we need. And so that we're still not there yet. And so that idea of how do we start talking about increasing our renewable energy use and even potentially solar implementation, deployment locally to be able to do this kind of thing. And one of the things that we are very happy to do is to talk about how we might be able to use and utilize this project to help move things in a direction that we might want across campus, especially related to net zero, but particularly with renewable energy as well. Another thing we're doing is looking at regenerative elevators. You don't get a whole lot back on that, but it's something, right? And it's also something that we can use in the classroom, or I can use in the classroom at least. I don't know about others. We're talking about plug loads. Daylighting obviously has been part of what we're designing. Off-building PV, which I just talked about, and then also things like mass timber, and in the actual construction of the building. And what happens post-occupancy when people aren't there, what's going on in the building, right? And so which could end up with more metering and other things like that. So which, that's just another thing that could be a cost, but there's savings. And then if there's ways to incorporate it in a business classroom, then, then I'll be knocking on the door trying to help with that as well. So we're looking at, like I said, shading, solar PV, mass timber, trying to see if I missed anything, radiant floors and slabs, a DOAS mechanical system, EV charging stations in the parking deck that will be below the building. Now the team also, I'm saying we isn't like I wasn't actually here when they did, I'm not doing the evaluation for them, but for the team that I'm representing here right now, they also looked at the parking deck that's there. The parking deck was not constructed to be able to hold the load of PV on top, unfortunately. So if we were to do that, we'd actually have to reconstruct or reinforce the entire structure, the entire parking deck structure. So that's probably not economically feasible at this point. But those are the kinds of things that the team has been looking at, and I'm trying to see if I can help with as well. So I would rather hear kind of your thoughts on these things. And here's a diagram of the photovoltaic opportunities. So this would be the new addition. This is the part of the roof of McCall that could be used. And this would be the new walkway. And this is the parking deck that unfortunately wouldn't be able to carry the load at this point. So some of the things that we're trying to, that team has tried to deal with is we don't have standards, so they went externally. Luckily there is LEED 0, so they used that. B is behavior of people in the building, the occupants, right? How are we going to get people to use less electricity, less energy? And I don't know if I should say the question out loud, but we had the same question when I was at Davidson's. Does everybody need the office space that they have? That kind of thing. Those are the tough questions we have to ask in the world, right? It's not really the toughest question I can think of in the world. And then in terms of bringing new technologies in, what do we have in place to help support training and opportunities for our staff and the people who are here? And so I'd like to think of it from working with workforce development organizations is how do we create opportunities for people to take training and want to do the training and be involved in the process, right? So that's my quick summary. There are a lot more details that I'm probably not expert enough to talk about, but I would love to get your feedback and your questions and see if there's some way that this project can help with what we're trying to do across campus.
Thanks, Jeff. That was awesome. I think you were maybe not explicit in saying that it's awesome the degree to which the business school has been leaders pushing for all of these standards and motivating it yourselves. And that's fantastic and should be celebrated. And I would love to think of ways for us to, as a group, to be able to create a situation that makes that scenario more frequent. And so whether it is it having a set of standards? Is it perhaps guidance that steers people generally in the right direction in terms of trying to achieve these goals in the context of the university's goals? The training, I think, is a great point. That's a really important investment that allows us to do things that we can't do now. So I see tons of opportunities for our group. The one specific thing I'll mention is that Jeff and I have both seen a draft document of some guidance around carbon neutrality and managing new building projects, whether they be renovations or whether they be new buildings, and thinking about how best those things are inserted into the process. And of course, that's the job of the folks who are doing the building. But to what extent can our group help provide some guidance, both in terms of the general, like the strategic, but also in terms of how does one go about this? Because it may not be a group that it was fortunate to have experts like Jeff and the committed facilities folks at the business school.
Yeah, and I want to give a special, I mean, Dave Moore has been a driver in this here at the business school for quite a while. So it's a pleasure to be able to try to support their activities. And one thing I didn't mention is there is also a drive to not resort to renewable energy certificates or carbon offsets. And so we've made those calculations, and there are actually certain things that we could do in a classroom with students to manage those kinds of things from a business perspective, somewhat, maybe even an investment perspective if combined with other things. But at the same time, we don't want, if possible, we don't want to resort to RECs and carbon offsets, both of which in previous years of my life, I've been on teams where we had those goals as well, but ended up having to buy renewable energy certificates and carbon offsets. But that is something that we would like to not have to do.
Hey, Jeff, putting aside my jealousy that you get to dream up a new building and actually see it built up there. And by the way, I'm not sure you have any buildings that are old enough up there to call it the old building, but we'll put that as that too. So I guess I'm thinking along the same lines as Mike's question, but to the extent to which what you're doing can help the rest of us across campus kind of do similar things. And I'm curious whether, at the beginning of the decision-making process, how much it mattered that upfront costs could lead to long-term savings, or was this something that the business school was going to do for other reasons, kind of no matter what?
So I cannot answer that question, unfortunately. I wish I knew the intentions all the way through, because I started in January and this project started way before I got, the dreaming of this project started way before I got here. I can say that, talking to Dave, it's been about doing the right thing and wanting to be an example of the 3 zeros. Literally, I think he had me on the books for my first meeting with him before I got to campus last January. And so, I would say that he's definitely a big driver here, but I was never in any of those discussions in the very beginning. So I wish I could tell you, but we are a business school. So we do look at the, what's going to be the return on that investment. Return on investment is not always just financial though. So, especially in a sustainability framework, right? So, we haven't started throwing out all of the, we haven't gotten the specific, so we've gathered a lot of data, but we haven't had actual applications from companies to do the individual parts, right? So we do have architects, and we do have, Dave internally as well. And we've talked to solar companies, we've talked to all of the energy management companies that you can think of, at least representations of them, but we don't have all of the, what's actually going to be proposed from the companies that we will eventually pay, right? We're not quite there.
Thanks.
So.
Hey, Jeff, is the rooftop footprint 50,000 square feet? Was that about right?
Yeah. Let me give you exact. I'll bring that back up. How's that sound?
And I'm wondering how far off the ground that is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I have another, you can imagine I have a slide deck that's a lot longer than this one.
Right, which has all the dimensions and everything else.
So 40,000 square feet of space for the PV. And then let me see if that's in a different, I also have 8,000 things open on my screen.
No, I was just doing a back of the cup.
A bunch of great resumes to hire those 10 interns I was talking about.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you ran small scale hydro off the runoff coming from the rooftop catchment, would you be able to use that for dealing with some of your plug loads? Let's say charging phones. You could have a phone charging network that might just run off that all by itself.
Okay.
But I have never seen it done before, and depending on how tall your building is,
I think I'm seeing 4. Yeah, I'll have to go through this huge deck to tell you exactly how large that is. But it is There's 2 levels of park, if this helps. 2 levels of parking. Those will be mostly underground, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 levels above that. So you probably can take, average height of a floor, and go from there. Unfortunately, I'm zooming in on one picture, and the clarity in the image is not enough to tell me what the height of each floor is, but I have it in front of me. I just can't read it. And I have my glasses on. That's that would be interesting for sure.
Sorry,
So are there other
zooming.
questions for Jeff?
I would also like to just connect to Elizabeth's presentation. Is it's a little bit different in terms of, because we're with the zero waste, we're struggling with the dining, right? We don't have a kitchen. And so, I mean, we have some space that can be used to do some silverware and things like that we've been talking about incorporating, but more often than not, people are going into the cafeteria and taking their food elsewhere. And so it's going to become a huge behavioral exercise, which myself and Dave, the CSE, are really excited about that kind of opportunity to work on behavior. And maybe there's a way to incorporate some things that we've learned from businesses like Literati to create something where there's incentives for people to geotag them, composting the right things and all that kind of stuff. But that also becomes a big data. You would need a company to run that data on its own. But just the idea of how do we work with food waste. I know the chief innovator officer I spoke with from Compost Now is excited about trying some new things, which could connect us to the local agriculture, local farmers, based on how our food waste is used, and then maybe back into dining services, and then be able to illustrate a circular design for a portion of our food and that kind of thing. So I would love to talk about any opportunities you might see with that, because I haven't seen the system and how things are working yet. So.
Great. Do we have other questions? So I guess I'll just reiterate that Jeff and I are talking about ways, what are the opportunities, being in the midst of this process as a building builder, and perhaps we'll have to circle back with folks who've been there since the beginning, what would be most useful and what would help. I guess it's a difficult question because the business school got to this optimal place of trying to do the right thing at whatever cost it took within reason. So far,
say whatever cost.
Yeah, so far. Yeah. So, but what sorts of guidance would be helpful? And I think it is really useful to not have it be hypothetical, have it be during the process. Mm-hmm. So really quickly, I just wanted to thank Natalie Murdoch, Senator Murdoch, who was able to join us. She was busy legislating earlier, and we are grateful for her being here. And I also wanted to mention Diamond Holloman couldn't be here for this meeting, but Diamond's going to be talking to us at our next meeting about her work in communities and thinking about environmental justice and how all that layers into all the things that we're talking about. And while I'm thanking people, thank you to Steve and Emily for making all of this possible. And I have no idea how I went offline because I came into the office to try and avoid that. But thank you, Steve. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone, for your great presentations. I think that gets us to open discussion. If there are topics that have come into people's minds as we've gone through the agenda, additional thoughts perhaps about the draft climate action plan. I have a set of to-dos that I'll follow up on quickly and send you all a modified version and then a draft version of how the public will be able to interact with the document and perhaps how we'll solicit that interaction. I think all those are critical pieces, but I'll just open up the floor if people have other things that they would like to talk about.
I just want to mention that I think, you brought up Diamond, but I actually have reached out to her. She's going to speak to our Environmental Finance Center next week about her work as well, to try to integrate a little bit more knowledge about those issues that are related to what we do. But I've learned so much just being on these calls about what's happening across campus. And I remember we had that sort of summit a couple years back to try to integrate all the different departments. But, I feel like this lack of sharing of solutions across campus is, one of the biggest detrimental things happening to inhibiting our ability to move forward with more sustainability. And I don't really know what the solution is, because I know capacity is a real challenge, and, case study sharing, and, Jeff providing the case study of what Keenan does so that we can go and say, well, maybe the School of Government could do, like being able to share that is challenging. But at the same time, to the extent we can integrate it into a plan as a university and say institutionally we want to provide capacity to make sure somebody is tracking and identifying these synergies, I think is a really important piece of this. Because I do think that from the financial standpoint, if you can provide for the other centers on campus the cost benefit analysis that's been done by someone else, and then the action steps to carry out something similar, you're doing so much of the heavy lifting. And so, I just think it's really eye-opening every time we're on these calls. Like, I didn't have any idea because I'm so in my bubble. And they use styrofoam sometimes at the School of Government, and we're like, in our EFC comes down and it's like, what? How are you guys using styrofoam? Like, what's going on? So Steve, don't tell Amy I said that, but so I just think, I just hope that we can figure out some solutions that help integrate them more.
I totally agree. And that is my aspiration for this group. And just a little bit of detail, we had another summit scheduled, but had to pull the plug because it just wasn't going to translate virtually. So that's on the books. There's been the original hosts, some have changed jobs. I think I might be the last one standing. But we have a whole host of people who are interested in reconvening that. And I think we can expand it now. Before it was hypothetical that we could expand sustainability and operations around sustainability to being a part of that group. And now it's not hypothetical. And I think that yours are great points. And that is definitely my aspiration. And I think your point that it's a lot of work is true, but it's my hope that very soon we're going to start building some horsepower to be able to get there. And that's how I think we become a really amazing asset. I think I'm grateful for everyone's time. Everyone does amazing things and provides great advice, but we could be really, really powerful if that ability to share that information, as you described, could be a little bit better mechanized. I didn't say operationalized because I'm tired of saying that. It makes me feel like a wonk. All right, do we have other questions, comments? All right, well, I'll be in touch soon. I hope that we'll have some more clarity around exciting things that may happen before Earth Day, and I'll share it with you all. For sure, we're gonna work towards getting the draft climate action plan out, which I think will be an incredibly positive step forward. And following that are all those other documents that I described. Yeah, I think we have a full slate, but awesome stuff. And that feels, not ever, sometimes you have to say it, I don't like saying great things are about to happen. So I would love 1 year into having this whole effort start, have some really substantive stuff. And I'm pretty confident, and I'm grateful to all of you for helping make it happen, for sure. All right, if nobody has anything else, we'll give each other back 20 minutes and go outside before it starts raining.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everybody have a great afternoon.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you,
Great
Mike.
work.
Talk to you
Thank
soon.
you, Emily and Steve.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you, guys.